Margaret Chen had been working at Camp Pendleton for nearly 18 months, and most people barely noticed her. She arrived every morning at exactly 7:30, carrying the same worn leather briefcase and wearing practical clothes that seemed to blend into the background. Her job in the administrative building involved filing reports, managing supply records, and handling correspondence between different departments. The Marines who passed her desk each day would offer polite nods, but few ever stopped to chat. Margaret preferred it that way. She spoke only when spoken to, completed her tasks efficiently, and left promptly at 5 o'clock each evening. Her supervisor, Colonel Williams, appreciated her reliability, but knew almost nothing about her personal life beyond the basic information in her employment file. What the base personnel did know was limited. Margaret was in her early 60s, lived alone in a small apartment about 15 minutes from the base, and had previously worked for various government offices. She never joined the other civilian employees for lunch, never participated in office celebrations, and declined all invitations to social gatherings. Some assumed she was simply antisocial, while others thought she might be dealing with personal grief or hardship. The younger Marines, fresh out of boot camp and eager to prove themselves, initially found Margaret's presence somewhat intimidating. She had a way of looking at people that seemed to see right through them, and her occasional corrections to their paperwork were always precise and accurate. Private Rodriguez once joked that she probably knew military regulations better than their drill instructors, though he said it quietly enough that she couldn't hear. Margaret's workspace was organized with military precision. Every pen had its place, every file was labeled clearly, and her desk remained spotless even during the busiest days. She never seemed flustered by deadlines or difficult requests, handling each task with the same calm efficiency. When new recruits struggled with administrative procedures, she would quietly step in to help, explaining complex forms and regulations in simple terms without making them feel foolish. The first hint that Margaret might be more than she appeared came during a routine security drill. When the alarm sounded for an evacuation exercise, most of the civilian staff looked confused and waited for instructions. Margaret, however, immediately began securing classified documents and following emergency protocols with practiced ease. She moved through the procedures faster than some of the junior officers, and her actions suggested familiarity with military emergency responses that went far beyond basic employee training. Lieutenant Foster noticed this behavior but didn't think much of it at the time. Many civilian employees who worked on military bases for extended periods picked up certain habits and procedures. What struck him as unusual was the confidence in Margaret's movements, as if she had performed these exact actions many times before under real rather than simulated conditions. The administrative building where Margaret worked housed several different departments, from personnel records to logistics coordination. Her position gave her access to a wide range of information and put her in contact with various levels of military hierarchy. She handled communications between base commanders and external agencies, processed reports from field operations, and maintained files that contained sensitive but not classified information. Despite her quiet demeanor, Margaret had earned a reputation for accuracy and discretion. Officers began specifically requesting her assistance with complex administrative tasks, knowing she would handle them correctly the first time. She never gossiped about the information she processed, never seemed curious about details beyond what she needed to complete her work, and never made mistakes that required corrections or follow-up. The Marines who worked most closely with her began to notice small details that seemed inconsistent with her civilian status. She knew military terminology that wasn't commonly used in administrative contexts. Her understanding of rank structures and chain-of-command protocols was remarkably thorough. When she occasionally made suggestions about improving office procedures, they often reflected knowledge of military efficiency standards that civilian employees wouldn't typically possess. Private Johnson, who delivered daily reports to Margaret's office, started paying closer attention to these inconsistencies. He noticed that she could identify aircraft by their engine sounds without looking outside, and she once corrected a senior NCO's use of military time in a way that suggested long familiarity with military culture rather than recent learning. The most puzzling aspect of Margaret's presence was her apparent comfort level with high-ranking officers. While other civilian employees showed obvious nervousness when colonels or generals visited the administrative building, Margaret treated them with professional respect but without the intimidation that typically affected civilian staff. She spoke to them directly, made eye contact, and seemed to understand military courtesy in ways that suggested personal experience rather than learned behavior. Her language patterns also raised subtle questions. She occasionally used military expressions that seemed natural rather than adopted, and her explanations of procedures sometimes included insights that could only come from having implemented them in operational rather than administrative contexts. These moments were brief and easily missed, but they created an impression that Margaret's military knowledge was deeper and more practical than her civilian position would explain. Colonel Williams had worked with many civilian employees throughout his career, and Margaret's competence level stood out even among the most experienced administrative staff. She anticipated needs before they were expressed, understood the implications of policy changes before they were explained, and handled sensitive situations with judgment that reflected understanding of military culture and values. The question of Margaret's background became a topic of quiet speculation among some of the Marines, though most were too busy with their duties to investigate further. Her personnel file contained standard information about previous employment and educational background, but nothing that explained her remarkable familiarity with military operations and culture. As weeks passed, more small incidents accumulated that suggested Margaret's past might be different from what appeared in her official records. She knew how to operate military communication equipment that most civilians never encountered. She understood security protocols that went beyond basic employee requirements, and she occasionally demonstrated knowledge of military history and traditions that seemed to come from personal experience rather than academic study. The mystery deepened when Margaret handled a particularly complex situation involving coordinating between multiple military departments and civilian agencies. Her performance during this crisis revealed organizational skills and strategic thinking that impressed even experienced officers. She managed communications, prioritized tasks, and solved problems with efficiency that suggested extensive experience in high-pressure military environments. Young Marines like Rodriguez and Johnson began to wonder if Margaret might have military experience in her background that wasn't reflected in her current civilian position. They noticed she never talked about family members in the military, never shared military stories or memories, and never participated in conversations about military service, despite her obvious knowledge and comfort with military culture. The first major clue came when a visiting general arrived for an unannounced inspection of the administrative facilities. Margaret's reaction to his presence was different from her usual professional courtesy. For just a moment, her posture changed in a way that suggested automatic military bearing, and she addressed him with a formality that seemed to come from muscle memory rather than conscious effort. Private Rodriguez happened to be in Margaret's office when the general arrived, and he noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. After the general left, he mentioned the incident to Private Johnson, and they began to pay closer attention to Margaret's behavior around high-ranking officers. They started to suspect that her familiarity with military culture might stem from personal service rather than civilian employment. The administrative building buzzed with activity as the end-of-month reports came due, and Margaret's expertise became even more apparent during these busy periods. She coordinated between departments with ease, resolved conflicts over resource allocation, and maintained schedules that kept everything running smoothly. Her performance during these demanding times reinforced the growing suspicion that she had experience managing complex military operations. As Margaret continued her quiet work, unaware that her colleagues were beginning to question her background, the stage was set for a discovery that would change everyone's understanding of the reserved woman who had become such an integral part of their daily operations. The young Marine's curiosity was growing, and circumstances were aligning that would soon reveal the truth about Margaret Chen's carefully guarded past. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Private Rodriguez was organizing old files in the basement storage room of the administrative building. Among boxes of archived documents, he discovered a collection of photographs from a ceremony held at the base 15 years earlier. The pictures showed various military personnel receiving commendations and awards, and Rodriguez was casually flipping through them when one image stopped him cold. There, In crisp military dress uniform with colonel's eagles on her shoulders, stood Margaret Chen. She appeared younger. Her hair was different. But there was no mistaking her face. In the photograph, she was receiving what appeared to be a Distinguished Service Medal from a 3-star general. Rodriguez stared at the image for several minutes, trying to reconcile the woman in the uniform with the quiet civilian who processed their daily paperwork. The photograph was labeled on the back with a date, and the notation, Colonel Margaret Chen, U.S. Marine Corps. Retirement ceremony. Rodriguez felt his hands shaking slightly as he realized what this meant. Margaret wasn't just familiar with military culture, because she had worked on bases as a civilian. She was a retired Marine colonel who had chosen to return to base life in a completely different capacity. Rodriguez immediately sought out Private Johnson, and together they examined the photograph more carefully. They found additional images from the same ceremony, showing Margaret in various formal poses with high-ranking officers, including several generals they recognized from current base leadership. The ceremony appeared to have been a significant event, suggesting that Margaret's military service had been distinguished and noteworthy. The young Marines faced a dilemma. They were intensely curious about Margaret's background, but they also respected her obvious desire for privacy. She had clearly chosen not to reveal her military past to her current colleagues, and they weren't sure whether confronting her directly would be appropriate or welcome. They decided to investigate further before taking any action. Johnson suggested they check military records that might be accessible through official channels. As active-duty Marines, they had access to certain databases that contained information about retired personnel. After some careful searching, they discovered Margaret's service record, and what they found was remarkable. Colonel Margaret Chen had served in the Marine Corps for 28 years. Her record showed multiple deployments to combat zones, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. She had commanded a logistics battalion, served as an advisor to Allied forces, and held several high-level staff positions at Marine Corps headquarters. Her decorations included the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters, and several commendation medals for exceptional performance in challenging assignments. Most impressive was her final assignment before retirement. Margaret had served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at Marine Corps Headquarters, a position that involved coordinating complex military operations worldwide. Her responsibilities had included managing resources for multiple combat deployments, working directly with general officers on strategic planning, and overseeing logistics operations that supported thousands of Marines in the field. The record showed that Margaret had retired with full honors after an exemplary career. Her performance evaluations consistently rated her as outstanding, and several letters of commendation from generals and other senior officers praised her exceptional leadership, strategic thinking, and dedication to the Marine Corps mission. She had been promoted ahead of her peers multiple times and had been selected for assignments typically reserved for the most promising officers. Rodriguez and Johnson realized they were looking at the service record of one of the most accomplished Marines they had ever encountered. Margaret's quiet presence in their administrative building took on completely new significance. She wasn't just a helpful civilian employee. She was a highly decorated combat veteran and former senior officer who had chosen to continue serving the Marine Corps in a different capacity. The mystery deepened when they discovered that Margaret's retirement had occurred exactly 18 months before her current employment began at Camp Pendleton. She had apparently taken no break between ending her military career and beginning her civilian work on the base. This suggested a continued commitment to Marine Corps service that went beyond simple employment necessity. Further investigation revealed that Margaret had specifically requested assignment to the administrative position she currently held. Rather than being placed in the job through standard civilian hiring processes, she had apparently asked for the opportunity to work in a support role that would allow her to contribute to base operations without the responsibilities and recognition that came with her former rank. The young Marines began to understand why Margaret seemed so comfortable with military protocols, and why her knowledge of operations exceeded what civilian employees typically possessed. She wasn't learning military culture. She had helped shape it during nearly 3 decades of distinguished service. Her efficiency and competence reflected years of experience managing complex military operations under demanding conditions. They also realized why high-ranking officers seemed to treat Margaret with unusual respect. Many of them had probably known her during her active duty career, when she held senior positions and commanded significant resources. Her transition to civilian status might have been official, but her reputation and relationships within the Marine Corps community remained intact. Private Johnson discovered additional information about Margaret's combat deployments. During her service in Afghanistan, she had commanded a logistics unit that maintained supply lines under frequent enemy fire. Her battalion had received several unit commendations for their ability to deliver essential supplies to forward operating bases despite dangerous conditions. Margaret had personally led convoys through hostile territory and had been recognized for her courage under fire. Her service in Iraq had been equally distinguished. Margaret had served as operations officer for a Marine expeditionary unit during some of the most intense fighting of the conflict. Her planning and coordination had contributed to several successful missions, and her ability to manage complex logistics in a combat environment had earned her recognition from both Marine Corps and Army commanders who worked with her unit. The records showed that Margaret had been wounded twice during her deployments, receiving Purple Hearts for injuries sustained during enemy attacks. Despite these wounds, she had completed her tours of duty and had volunteered for additional overseas assignments. Her commitment to service and her willingness to accept personal risk for mission success were evident throughout her career. Rodriguez and Johnson also learned about Margaret's role in training and mentoring junior officers. Many of the Marines who had served under her command had gone on to distinguished careers of their own, and several had written letters crediting Margaret's leadership and guidance for their professional development. She had apparently been known for her ability to develop talent and for her commitment to ensuring that younger Marines received the experience and support they needed to succeed. As they absorbed this information, the young Marines began to see Margaret's current behavior in a completely different light. Her quiet competence wasn't the result of careful learning. It reflected decades of experience in positions of significant responsibility. Her ability to anticipate needs and solve problems came from years of managing operations where failure meant lives were at risk. They understood now why Margaret seemed unfazed by deadline pressure, and why she handled difficult situations with such calm efficiency. She had faced far greater challenges during her military career, including combat operations where the stakes were much higher than administrative deadlines. Her current work, demanding as it was, probably seemed relatively straightforward compared to coordinating supply operations under enemy fire. The discovery also explained Margaret's reluctance to socialize with her colleagues. As a former colonel working alongside junior Marines and civilian employees, she was navigating a complex transition from a position of authority to one of support. She had probably chosen to maintain distance to avoid any awkwardness that might arise from her previous rank and status. Rodriguez and Johnson realized they had uncovered something remarkable. Margaret Chen wasn't just a quiet civilian employee who happened to be good at her job. She was a decorated combat veteran and former senior officer who had chosen to continue serving the Marine Corps in a humble capacity that allowed her to contribute without seeking recognition or authority. The question now was, what to do with this knowledge? Margaret had clearly chosen not to reveal her background, and the young Marines respected her right to privacy. At the same time, they felt that her service and sacrifice deserved recognition, and they believed their fellow Marines should know they were working alongside a genuine hero. As they considered their options, Rodriguez and Johnson decided they needed to approach the situation carefully. Margaret had earned the right to determine how much of her story she wanted to share, but they also felt a responsibility to ensure that her continued service to the Marine Corps was acknowledged and appreciated. The discovery had transformed their understanding not just of Margaret, but of the quiet heroism that sometimes existed in unexpected places. They realized that some of the most distinguished Marines might be found in the most unlikely positions, continuing to serve their corps and their country in ways that went unnoticed and unrecognized. Their investigation had revealed a story of service, sacrifice, and continued dedication that challenged their assumptions about what heroism looked like and where it could be found. Margaret Chen had proven that true service to the Marine Corps could take many forms, and that the most significant contributions weren't always the most visible ones. Private Rodriguez and Private Johnson spent 3 days debating how to handle their discovery about Margaret Chen. They understood the significance of what they had learned. But they also respected Margaret's obvious desire to keep her military background private. Finally, they decided to approach her directly, choosing a moment when the administrative office was quiet and they could speak without being overheard. Margaret was reviewing supply reports when the two Marines approached her desk. Rodriguez, who had found the original photograph, spoke first. He explained what they had discovered and showed her the retirement ceremony pictures. Margaret's reaction was not what they expected. Instead of anger or embarrassment, she simply nodded and set down her pen. "I wondered when someone would figure it out," she said quietly. "I'm surprised it took this long." Her voice carried none of the nervousness they had anticipated, just the same calm competence they had observed in her daily work. Margaret looked at the photograph for a moment, then asked them to sit down. What followed was a conversation that changed both young Marines' understanding of service, sacrifice, and the many ways people choose to continue serving their country. Margaret explained that her transition to civilian work had been entirely voluntary. After 28 years of active duty, she had reached a point where she wanted to continue contributing to the Marine Corps mission, but without the pressures and responsibilities of command. "I spent decades giving orders and making decisions that affected thousands of people," Margaret told them. "When I retired, I realized I wanted to serve in a different way. I wanted to support the mission without carrying the weight of command." Her choice to work in an administrative capacity allowed her to use her knowledge and experience while giving younger Marines the opportunity to develop their own leadership skills. Margaret revealed that several senior officers on the base knew about her background, including Colonel Williams, her immediate supervisor. Her employment had been arranged through informal channels, with the understanding that she preferred to work without reference to her previous rank or achievements. The arrangement allowed her to contribute meaningfully, while maintaining the privacy she desired. The conversation revealed the depth of Margaret's commitment to the Marine Corps and her fellow Marines. She had chosen to accept a significant reduction in pay and status because she believed in the importance of the work being done at Camp Pendleton. Her administrative duties, while seemingly mundane, supported operations that directly affected Marine readiness and effectiveness. Private Johnson asked why she had never corrected the assumptions people made about her background. Margaret smiled for the first time since they had begun talking. "Every Marine here is focused on their own mission and their own development," she said. "I didn't want my past to become a distraction, or to make anyone feel they needed to treat me differently." Her reasoning reflected a sophisticated understanding of military culture and hierarchy. Margaret had recognized that revealing her background might create awkwardness for junior Marines who would suddenly find themselves working alongside a former colonel. By maintaining her civilian identity, she had preserved the natural working relationships that allowed everyone to focus on their duties. Margaret also shared some of her experiences during her military career, though she remained characteristically modest about her achievements. She described her deployments not as heroic adventures but as opportunities to serve alongside exceptional Marines who had faced danger and hardship with courage and dedication. Her stories focused on the Marines she had commanded, rather than her own actions. The combat deployments Margaret described painted a picture of leadership under the most challenging conditions. She had commanded logistics operations that kept Marines supplied with food, ammunition, and medical supplies in environments where convoy routes were regularly targeted by enemy forces. Her decisions had directly affected the safety and effectiveness of Marines in combat positions. During one particularly dangerous period in Afghanistan, Margaret's unit had been tasked with maintaining supply lines to several isolated outposts that were under regular attack. Traditional convoy routes had become too dangerous, and Margaret had developed alternative transportation methods that involved helicopter resupply and coordinated ground movements that minimized exposure to enemy fire. Her innovations had not only maintained essential supplies but had also reduced casualties among the Marines responsible for transportation operations. Several of the techniques she developed were later adopted by other units and contributed to improved safety for logistics operations throughout the theater. Margaret's strategic thinking and willingness to challenge conventional approaches had saved lives. Rodriguez and Johnson learned that Margaret's leadership style had been built on the same quiet competence they observed in her civilian work. She had been known for listening carefully to input from subordinates, making decisions based on thorough analysis, and accepting personal responsibility for outcomes. Her approach to command had emphasized developing the capabilities of junior Marines rather than micromanaging their activities. The young Marines asked about Margaret's decision to remain at Camp Pendleton after retirement, rather than pursuing civilian opportunities elsewhere. Margaret explained that her connection to the Marine Corps ran deeper than professional obligation. The values and relationships she had developed during her career remained central to her identity, and she wanted to continue being part of the Marine Corps community. Her choice reflected a dedication to service that extended beyond personal advancement or recognition. Margaret had spent her entire adult life as part of the Marine Corps, and retirement didn't diminish her commitment to supporting the mission and the Marines who carried it forward. Working in an administrative capacity allowed her to maintain that connection while adapting to a different stage of her life. As their conversation continued, Margaret shared insights about leadership and service that reflected decades of experience in challenging positions. She emphasized that effective leadership often involved knowing when to step back and allow others to grow, and that the most important contributions weren't always the most visible ones. Private Rodriguez asked if Margaret ever missed the authority and recognition that came with her former rank. Margaret considered the question carefully before responding. "Leadership is about responsibility, not privilege," she said. "I'm still contributing to the mission, just in a different way. The satisfaction comes from knowing that the work matters, not from being recognized for it." Her response revealed a mature understanding of service that impressed both young Marines. Margaret had discovered that fulfillment came from contribution rather than status, and that meaningful work could take many forms. Her transition from colonel to civilian employee represented a conscious choice to prioritize mission over personal recognition. The conversation also addressed the question of whether Margaret's background should be shared with other personnel on the base. Margaret expressed her preference for maintaining her current status, but she acknowledged that Rodriguez and Johnson had the right to share what they had discovered. She asked only that any discussion of her background focus on the importance of service rather than on her individual achievements. Over the following weeks, the word about Margaret's background gradually spread among the Marines at Camp Pendleton. The revelation was handled with the respect and discretion that characterized the best of Marine Corps culture. Rather than changing how people interacted with Margaret, the knowledge enhanced their appreciation for her contributions and deepened their respect for her commitment to service. Colonel Williams, when asked about Margaret's background, confirmed that her employment had been arranged specifically to allow her to continue contributing to the Marine Corps mission. He emphasized that Margaret's value to the base came not from her previous rank, but from her continued dedication to excellence and her willingness to support the development of younger Marines. The story of Margaret Chen became a powerful example of service that extended beyond traditional military careers. Her choice to continue contributing in a humble capacity while maintaining her commitment to Marine Corps values inspired both junior and senior personnel. She demonstrated that dedication to mission could take many forms, and that the most meaningful service often occurred without fanfare or recognition. Margaret's presence at Camp Pendleton took on new significance as people understood her story. She represented the continuity of Marine Corps values across generations and the various ways that Marines could contribute to their Corps throughout their lives. Her quiet competence and selfless service provided a model of dedication that transcended rank and status. The young Marines who had uncovered Margaret's story learned important lessons about assumptions, service, and the many ways that people choose to make meaningful contributions. They discovered that heroism often wore civilian clothes, and that the most distinguished service members might be found in the most unexpected places. Margaret Chen continued her work with the same quiet efficiency that had always characterized her performance. But now her colleagues understood the depth of experience and commitment that informed her daily contributions. She remained a modest presence in the administrative building, but her story had revealed the extraordinary service that sometimes hides behind ordinary appearances. Her example demonstrated that true dedication to the Marine Corps could survive any transition, and that the most important contributions were measured not by recognition received, but by impact made. Margaret Chen had proven that Marines never really retire. They simply find new ways to serve their corps and their country.